Welcome back to our study on the book of Romans. This is the Sonship Review Part 10, and this is session 41. We were talking about we need that issue of prayer. Let me back that back up in the process. We need that issue of prayer because prayer is the thing that is meant to activate our remembrance of the doctrine. So that now, instead of thinking about the way we might have been thinking about it, now we think about it the way we have been taught to think about it. And the way what we do with that now is changed from what we'd have done before to now I'm going to do something very differently. And so that is the role that prayer is playing for us. It is the means by which, folks, our sanctification gets put into practice. And it should not be substituted for. So why not just wear a button? Why wouldn't we rather just wear a button that says, remember the doctrine? Well, what's the answer to that? What? Would that be good enough? That's not what God said. God didn't say, wear a button or tie a string on your finger. He didn't say that. What did He say? Well, actually, He's going to talk about prayer, and I'm going to show you the verses here in just a moment. They're the means by which we recall that doctrine to be able to live out of it. Now, it's not in the way that we normally think about it. We'll come back to that. But here's the point. Here's the answer to this question. The reason we don't wear a button or tie a string on our finger to remind us about the doctrine is because those things do not build the father-son relationship that we have with our Heavenly Father. Prayer does that. We can't see Him with our physical eyes, hear Him with our physical ears, or put our hand on His shoulder. The point of contact between us and our Heavenly Father is prayer. And if we're going to develop that and isn't this supposed to be a relationship? It is. And if it's a relationship, that's the way we engage in that relationship. And when we're talking to Him about whatever it is that we're in the midst of, then that's building that relationship. It's integrating that relationship into our life. And so we want that intimate, adopted son relationship with Him. And folks, we got to cultivate that here and now, because what I'm about to talk to you about is what you're going to be putting into practice when you get up there in your glorified body. Okay, having said that, I'm going to give you an illustration. They say a picture's worth 1,000 words. So you know what? You know me, I can't say anything short. Hey, we're on the way here, and I'm trying to set a context for today's deal with April and Jonathan, and I say, let me take 2 minutes and tell you. And before I can start saying it, April said this. You can't say anything in 2 minutes. Okay. No. So, and I didn't get it done in 2 minutes. But that's not the point. That's no point. Pay no attention to that man behind the curtain. Okay. When prayer works the way it is supposed to, real sonship prayer, then what it does is it functions as a bridge. And I'm going to give this to you. So, when I said a picture's worth 1,000 words, I have several of them. So, that'll save us all some time. Here we go. So, let me get that. What it is that you now understand and believe to be true, and I say before, in order for godly living to take place in that, prayer is the bridge between those two. And I want to add something to that. Oh, that was a wrong color to put on this, wasn't it? So you can see that now, not only do we understand it, but we believe it. Let's go to the other side in the white. That's the godly living, whereby we are transformed. Okay. But over here, what you may not be able to see, can you read that in red there? That is the education. That's what we're learning. But that word over on the right is what? Edification. And what is the difference between education? Education is all of the data that you need to know, but edification is when that data is now in you and you're actually now operating out of it. And so what I have below prayer is, as you begin to pray, the first part that gets impacted is your thinking. And if that's coming out of the doctrine, that's not human thinking, that's not worldly thinking, that's godly thinking. That's your Heavenly Father's thinking. And it often runs contrary to what normal human thinking would be. Now here's the next one. And so here's what we did. We received that form of doctrine, and then the Word of Christ, remember when we read that a few weeks ago? The Word of Christ begins to dwell in us richly. It's that Word, that form of doctrine. That's what that is. You receive that form of doctrine, and that Word is now dwelling in us. And when it says it's dwelling in us, what does that mean?
You're thinking about it.
Yeah, well, if it's dwelling, it's not just...
It stays there.
Yeah, I mean, you know what? It's producing something in you. It's working. The dwelling is not just, it just happens to be in there, but it's just laying on its side asleep. It's doing something. And what is it doing? What is it meant to do? What is it designed to do? Yeah, and when it works in you, it's transforming us, right? Look, we could use any of these. It's conforming us to the image of God's Son, right? And so, here's this last one. And the life of Christ is made manifest. I'm just quoting the verse here. The life of Christ is made manifest in our mortal bodies. What is manifest? It means to put on public display. His life is being put on display in us. Why? Because that Word was dwelling in us. And what caused us to get to... And I want to show you the process whereby prayer is the link that actually connects those two. Because without that, and to do that, folks, we're going to have to talk about prayer in a way that it is not normally talked about, even for us. And so, because of that, I kind of want to go slowly here and make sure that we're really getting what we're talking about. In order to do this, I want you to see the two verses that we're going to be focused on here. 1 Thessalonians 5:17, pray without ceasing. Now we look at that and everybody has an idea about what they think that means. But I want to talk to you about what I think Paul has in mind when he says that. Here's the second verse. Rejoicing in hope, patient in tribulation, and here's the part that we're really after, continuing instant in prayer. Now we're all going to break those down in just a minute, but before we do, here's what I want to say to you. Sonship prayer, and when I say sonship prayer, I am talking about someone who is praying with an understanding that they are an adopted son of their Heavenly Father, and they know what that means. That we are being trained in the Father's business, and we're going to be involved in that business in the heavenly places. And what we are doing now, the work in this Word, is equipping us for that future vocation that we're going to have up there. When that kind of person prays, that's what I'm talking about. Praying without ceasing and continuing instant in prayer. Real sonship prayer is not so much, don't misunderstand me here. That kind of prayer is not so much about secluding ourselves off at the end of the day and then talking to God about all the things that are on our mind. I'm not telling you that's a bad thing. I'm just telling you that that kind of prayer is not what is being described here. I mean, I could jump ahead a little bit, but let me ask you a question. If something is continuing, what does that mean? It's ongoing, isn't it? It doesn't quit. It is continuing. Because when it ceases, is it continuing? No. What is instant? I'm going to take you over to the OED in just a minute, but for now,
At any time.
at any time, yeah, what'd you say, hon?
Quick.
Yeah, quick. So here's what I need to talk to us about. Prayer the way this is meant to happen. For this process that I was talking about up there, let me just back up one. For all of this process where we take the doctrine we've come to understand and we believe that is true, and now what we want to do is we want that to change our thinking, to impact our daily conduct and behavior, and equip us to labor with our Father in the things He is doing. That kind of prayer is not so much, I'm not saying it's a bad thing, it is not so much about getting alone and getting on your knees and closing your eyes and saying, okay, God, now I want to talk to you about it. That's not as effective as this kind of praying. Because this kind of praying, folks, is supposed to happen in a moment of time continually throughout the day. Now, you know what's wrong with that? What's wrong with that is if you're thinking about that from the old way of understanding prayer, you're going to say, look, sometimes I'm busy. I don't have time to stop and pray. And that's what I'm asking you to think about. I'm not asking you to stop at all. In fact, I'm asking you not to stop. I'm asking you to learn to do two things at once. One of them is to live your life, and the other one is to be in constant communication with your Heavenly Father in connection with the doctrine that He is teaching you. Because all of that is supposed to happen in real time, not a time out. If you want to take a time out, fine. But you are supposed to learn to be able to do this as these other things are happening. Every mom knows how to do this. If you have kids, it doesn't matter. If you ever have kids and there's something going on and you know you got to kind of keep an eye on them, do you know what it's like to pull laundry out and keep an eye, or to have something on the stove and keep an eye? I mean, I'm not saying you never burned anything or anything like that. I'm just saying, you know how there's something in your mind that is so important that it is constantly, I hate to say it this way, because the Bible doesn't say it this way, but I'm trying to get the thought across. It's constantly running in the background. And at any moment where something happens in connection with what's going on back here, you are aware of it. Do you know what I'm saying? You don't know what I'm saying. If you say you don't, we're going to go through this again. Look, that is the kind of prayer that Paul is talking about when he says pray without ceasing. This is the kind of prayer where he says continuing instant. That's what I'm talking about. It's in that moment. But do you understand that in order to do that, that has to be a skill that you cultivate? Because that's not how we normally look at prayer. We look at prayer just the way we did it before we started these sessions today. I stood right up here at the front and everybody got quiet and we had prayer and we did that. But you know what? That should be going on in our minds as you sit here in the midst of these sessions. And that should be going on in my mind even as I stand here and lead these sessions. And that should be going on in our mind, and you have to learn to do that because it doesn't come automatically. It's a skill you hone and develop. But that's what your Father is after. Because remember in the old days, again, I'm not trying to hurt anybody's feelings here, but remember way back there when I talked about learning to review your day with your Heavenly Father? You remember when we talked about that? That was a beginning way of doing this. It was just a beginning way. Now what I'm doing is I'm trying to take you from that, and this is the part that I know might be somewhat offensive. I'm not trying to do that. I'm trying to take you from a childlike understanding to an adult understanding. I mean, we all have to start at the beginning, right? So I'm not trying to say that to be offensive, but when we waited till the end of the day to review our day, do you know what for sure is happening in those times? You're not remembering everything that went through the day. You're just hitting the highlights. Wouldn't it be better in the very midst of what you're doing to have the godly thinking that was generated in you by the doctrine that you have come to understand come into your mind in those very moments, so that your thinking now lines up with your Heavenly Father's, your speech lines up in accordance with that doctrine, that what you do now is exactly what ought to be done if you had that thing in mind. And prayer is the bridge that connects what you've come to understand, what you've learned, and what you're doing all through your day. And it's what pulls, prayer is what pulls all of that together into a constant, present prayer that starts from the time you get up in the morning until you go to bed at night. I know that's different. But that is the skill that you're going to need when you get into the heavenly places. So you might as well learn it here and now. Because that's, and by the way, isn't it better, if you're really going to learn to live out of the doctrine, isn't it better to develop that skill like on-the-job training? Rather than wait till the end of the day when it's all over and then try to... I mean, it's not a bad thing to think back and kind of review what you were doing. And in the beginning, you'll still need to do some of that. But what I'm hoping is you're going to be able to do that very difficult thing. Like driving a standard transmission. Anybody here ever driven a standard? My dad taught me to drive a standard. And when we went out, we used to go fishing out in these country roads. And so he was out there one time, and he got out and he said, "Come over here and get behind the car. I'm going to teach you how to drive a standard." And I mean, when I got behind that wheel, he said, "Okay, here's what you do." He said, "Put your foot on the clutch, foot on the brake." He said, "Pull that down into first." And he said, "And then put your foot on the gas, and I want you to let off of that clutch and give it a little bit of gas." And you know what happens the first time you do that? You're at like 9,000 RPMs because you don't realize, you have to feel that, too much gas. And then he says, let out on the clutch. I let out on the clutch. Boom! I mean, it's like riding a jackrabbit. It's just leaping down the road. Dad said, no, look, don't let it out on a little slower. Push on that gas. And then he goes, and now push that column shift up into second. And I'm thinking, it's too many things to do at the same time. I'll never get, you know what I really thought? I'll never learn this. I'm never going to learn this. Dad said, one day, he said, you'll be at a red light. And he said, you know what, as soon as it turns green, you'll just throw that in first. That left foot will let off the clutch. You'll push on that gas. You'll be talking. You'll shift into second, and you won't even know. You won't consciously be aware that you're doing 45 miles an hour and you're in third gear. You're just going down the road. And I said, I don't know if I'll be the only person in the world to never get there. And then one day, we're driving down the road, and those words came back to me, and I realized, you know what? I don't even think about consciously doing it anymore. That's where I want us to get to be continuing instant in prayer. To pray without ceasing. So that as we're living our life and whatever we're doing, that doctrine, and do you see how important this is? because we're about to get back into Romans 12. So I want us to cultivate this, because this is what's going to take that doctrine in the moments of our day, and we're going to put it into use, and it is sonship prayer that is going to bring all of that into our mind. Let me give you one more example. What I got left here? Okay. Look, let me give you one more example of this. Let me see how I want to say this. Because have you ever, something happened and it was just that thing that had your attention, and you thought about it in a certain way and you responded to it in a certain way, and then later when you were talking to your Heavenly Father, you thought about what you thought and what you did or what you said, and you thought, wow, that really wasn't what I should have been thinking. See, that's the problem with waiting until after the fact. Wouldn't it be better in the very midst of that situation for the doctrine to click in instantly? And prayer is the mechanism that activates the doctrine in our minds. Now, someone is hearing this now on the tape, and here's what they're saying. I don't want that. That does not sound like fun. Because if I do that, all of the pleasure I got from my old way of thinking and talking and all of that, that's going to go away. I don't know what to tell you. But this is what you were created to be. It occurs to me that once again the policy of evil has been very successful at giving us great pleasure in an incomplete substitute while keeping us from the thing that is very necessary for us. Okay, so there's more I want to say about this. We're almost out of time in this session. So I'm going to come back and pick this up in the second session, because I need to talk to you about the things that, how we'll do this, kind of walk us through this process. And you're going to have to keep this in your mind. I mean, this is just the way this is supposed to work. All right, so we'll stop here, we'll take a break, and then we'll come back and pick this up.